Hello my friends, welcome back to Future Fiber. This is a channel where I talk about mostly knitting at this point, and today we're going to be knitting and chatting. So, very apt for the channel. I didn't really need that intro, did I? Anyways, welcome back, glad you're here. I got a couple minutes today before I have to go do something, so I am going to, film this. And I wanted to do this because I had a bit of an update, I guess, to give around my no-buy year that I've been trying to attempt. I know people that watch my podcasts every 2 weeks have a general idea of how that's been going, but I wanted to kind of have a video where I talk about it as its own topic, I guess. And I didn't want it to be anything formal because it's not like I'm going to super beat myself up for doing it. It's just like a fun challenge for me. So I felt kind of weird making, like a dedicated, fully edited, framed video series for this. So like all things that I do, nothing is really planned, and this is part of that, I guess. Today I'm going to be knitting on my free-handed vest that I've been working on. I think it's got a little bit more progress from people who've seen it on my podcast, but it's got, the neckline now, and I'm kind of scared because I think it's going to turn out a little bit smaller than I intended, so I'm just gonna have to see once it's done. But I'm not gonna frog it, I'm just gonna keep going. So, okay, no-buy year. So to recap a little bit on what the challenge, I guess, was. This is not something that's specific to yarn for me. It's across like my entire life, kind of. I feel like, to talk about the motivations of why I started doing this, I feel like last year and the previous years before that, I've kind of gotten into this mentality of, I live in New York, and there's New York City, and there's a lot of advertisements that hit you every day. I used to work in an office in Soho for a bit of my life, and people are really well dressed, things really get to you a little bit when you are constantly in that space. And I just felt like maybe not everyone feels like this, but I kind of felt like I had to keep up with the Joneses a little bit. And I had started a new job, and then now I was making a little bit more money than I had before, and I just felt like, oh yeah, like this is now the time. So anyways, all that is to say, I just felt like I had fallen into this mindset where I was really trying to maybe compensate for some things in my life with buying stuff, like having the package come to your door and having that little bit of endorphin, like walking into a store and buying something. Like I almost felt like whenever I walked into a store, I couldn't leave without buying something. So that kind of goes for yarn stores as well. Once I started getting into knitting really seriously, I just, I would walk into art stores or yarn stores or whatever, and I just couldn't leave. Like I couldn't leave Michael's, or if I ever chanced into a Michael's, I couldn't leave without buying something. If I walked into a local yarn store, I couldn't leave without buying something because I felt like I had to support the yarn store, which I think is, yeah, it's true and it's good. But I just felt like, for me personally, it was kind of getting to me in a way that wasn't really healthy. So that's why I kind of started doing the no-buy year. So the rules for me with the no-buy year were kind of like, so this is not just for yarn, as I said, it's for clothing and other things in my life as well, like furniture. I can't buy furniture unless, and the general rule of this is that I can't buy something unless I replace something that I have or declutter enough of it so that I can't, it makes up for the space sort of. And with yarn, it's been that I really, really try not to buy anything, and I usually try and knit from stash. And I think I've kept pretty decently well to that. I do have to say I've broken the ban kind of twice. Once was when I walked into the local yarn store near me, and they had a bargain like yarn bin, I guess, that somebody donated, and they had yarns that were $1 per skein. And then I had a particular project that I wanted to make with my knitting machine, and the central knitting machine, and I didn't really have any yarns that could work with the central knitting machine. A lot of the yarns that I have in my stash currently are like not the right weight and not the right material. Like they're all woolly or mohair or not the right weight. So that's why I bought them, and I spent $2 on 2 skeins or balls of yarn. And then another was when I went to a local yarn store, local to wherever I was visiting in Vermont yarn store. And then I just felt like I needed a souvenir for the whole trip, so I bought a set of double pointed needles, and that was like the second time that I kind of broke that ban. And I've also bought yarn, I think, one more time, and that was to buy a yarn for a gift for a friend. So I didn't really feel like it counted towards like my Nova year, I guess, because I still, while I'm trying to reduce like consumption, I guess, overall, I think, a gift, I gotta get people gifts. Like that's just something that's important to me, I guess, and I don't feel bad buying yarn to make gifts for people if I know that they're really going to appreciate it, and it seems like my friend did, so that was a plus. It's always fun to see people wearing the stuff you made. Makes you feel very good. But to give a more of a, I guess, update on how much I've reduced my stash, I think the biggest visual indicator, well, let me start with what I started with, because I didn't take a video or any kind of documentation or log of what I had, but I have a general like visual idea of what I had because I store my yarn in kind of bins, like plastic bins. So I brought one down from where I usually keep it. So this is the bins that I typically keep my yarn in. This is one of them. This is all yarn that you guys haven't seen yet, and I'll talk about them in a future video because I have a project in mind. But I have 4 of these bins, and then I also had 3 or 4 baskets that are the size of like IKEA Kallax units. Those cubbies are like, I believe 11 inches by 11 inches by 13 inches deep. So that's the amount of yarn that I had. And then I managed to bring it down to, you can see that this is like kind of empty here, so I've taken some yarn out. But I have managed to clear, I think, 3 of those like larger baskets basically. And then I've taken stuff out just here and there from these plastic bins, and then I've managed to clear about like half of these 4 plastic bins. So that's kind of the update, and it kind of gives a visual indicator of how much yarn I actually had. And if you're buying yarn, I guess for me, I just didn't realize how much I had in general. I just always felt like, okay, I have projects for these and I'm going to eventually get to them, and like this is something, I didn't buy this without like reckless abandon. For example, like I usually have some sort of project in mind and then buy the yarn. So I just always felt like it wasn't like, oh, this stash isn't that big of a deal. It's not huge. I feel like I could use it up. But, well, I did use a lot of yarn, and I counted my, finished object list, I guess, that I had included in my podcast episodes from episode, 0 to, now. And it seems that I have finished just about 25 projects. So that's not, even if a lot of them are like smaller things, that's still, I feel like a, decent amount of projects that I finished. And even then, like visually and volume wise, that still wasn't all. Like, that wasn't, you know, I still don't think I'm going to be able to get through my entire stash this year, which is kind of insane if you think about it. And I just feel like for me as a knitter, I mean, I'm pretty new as a knitter as well. I've been doing this for like, I think at least this point. I started at the beginning of the pandemic seriously knitting, so that's like 3 years at this point. No. Is that 4 years? Guys, I have no perception of time and passage of like, I don't exist in the fourth dimension at all. Like, I don't know how time works. Anyway, so it's been about that long of a time since I knit pretty seriously, and that's the length of time that I've collected this yarn too, and like a little bit from before because I had made some attempts to knit. But you know, that even then, it is kind of crazy that I've accumulated that much yarn without kind of regard for how quickly I can knit through that yarn. I just don't think I had a great, how do I say this? I don't think I had a physical understanding of how long it takes me to knit something, if that makes any sense. And I feel like this know by ear and really knitting from my stash is kind of helping me ingrain that into my body a little bit. Like, you experience how long it takes to knit up a sweater, knit up a vest, knit up socks, and how much yarn that is going to take away from your stash. I feel like this year, while we're a quarter past it now, and I feel like that's really given me that point of reference, should I say, for my yarn consumption versus purchasing rates. So in the future, even if I do buy yarn for projects, I feel like I'm going to have a better understanding of how quickly I can get through these things. So I just think that's a plus. So not to really knock on anybody who enjoys buying yarn and keeping stash and things like that, because part of the things that I really enjoyed from knitting from my stash was just understanding how I'm inspired to make certain pieces. I just never really thought about it that deeply before, like I would usually buy yarn and then I have some sort of pattern in my mind to knit with that yarn, and then I would, knit that particular project. But because I've had some of these yarns for so long, they've kind of like marinated in my head, and I've no longer wanted to knit some projects that I originally wanted to knit with that yarn. So I would have different yarn combos that would come to mind as I just started looking through my stash, or even with like my single skeins or scraps. I would look at them and put the different colors together and think of what I can knit or crochet with that. And I feel like that's been a pretty interesting and kind of learning process. It also gives me it also really gave me a better understanding, having the stash, how certain fibers can work together and look together. So I feel like I have a pretty good gauge of like, if I put this and this color together, it's going to look good, or like at least not eye-searing offensive, and how it's going to feel or wash and expand after washing and blocking and all that stuff. So just being able to touch everything and put them together right then and there is a very good feeling. It's like having your own yarn store at home. And that was a good experience for me personally in learning with knitting. So I wouldn't say there are, significant pros and cons to keeping a stash. I think it's just do whatever works for you. For me, I just needed this extended period of time where I wasn't actively trying to bring more choices into my life, so to say. I think a big thing with just knitting from your stash too is just the ability for it to remove a lot of options for you. And that could be a good or bad thing depending on the kind of person you are and the situation you're in. But for me, for this year especially, it's not been the most... This year really hasn't been the most stress-free, I guess, for me. So anything to kind of reduce that, anything that will give me stress. Like, I feel like, I don't want to call it executive dysfunction because I don't really think that's what it is, but it's more like choice paralysis. I get into that a lot, where if I feel like there is too many options, I just won't do anything. And I think a lot of people share this experience as well. It's, you know, it's like whenever you're trying to decide, what should we go eat for dinner or whatever, then you have so many choices that you don't make, you feel paralyzed almost. And that's kind of how I felt about projects a little bit. I was really afraid of making the wrong yarn choice, or knitting the thing and not having it work out. But through knitting through your stash kind of eliminates a lot of that, where you don't really have as many choices. You don't have to shop through like all of these patterns, and then you have to think about, okay, now what yarn am I going to use for this? And I know some people really enjoy that process of thinking and kind of discovery as well. And I do to a certain extent. Like, I wouldn't do those pattern compilation videos if I didn't really like doing that digging. But I had already spent so much time, you know, digging through the patterns and what I want to knit, that trying to decide on what yarn I should use too on top of it was just really getting to me. And if I only have a certain set of yarns, then it really cuts down on your options, eh? So I think at that, and also whenever I wanted to knit something because I saw it on Instagram and was being influenced to knit something, I would have to seriously think about, okay, well, do I have the yarn to actually knit this? And then most of the times it's a no, because I don't actually have sweaters quantity of that particular weight of yarn. And so at that point I have to make a choice. Okay, do I want to knit it off gauge? Do I want to knit this thing that bad that I'm going to use and break into this yarn, sweater quantity of yarn that I had planned for a different project? And then I have to kind of weigh it against that other project that I had in mind. But that's, to me, a lesser evil than me also considering what yarn to buy and stuff. So it really cuts out that trail, like brain pathway towards consumption and purchasing, which is helpful for me. And because I am using my kind of creative brain sort of in things that I could do immediately, it also helps me, I think, with getting that purchasing high a little bit. Like, since I've been able to finish, I've made a lot more smaller projects this year, and that's really, you know, the cast off serotonin is going through the roof when I've made like when I made like 4 scarves in like 2 weeks or something. That's just like and that's been nice as well, because before I would have, you know, projects that would languish for weeks and months. But now I have, since I'm actively trying to knit from stash, I'm using my creative brain in a way that's more open to knitting smaller things and getting things done a little bit more quickly and such and such. So yeah, that's been really nice. I think this is this year is going to be a pretty, it's a different experience from my previous years. I've never really had this much time to knit before, and I've never really applied myself to knitting like I did this year. And I think I have YouTube and the knitting community to kind of thank for that. So I do think it's a really positive thing that I started podcasting. Well, I don't even know if we can call this podcasting, because it's like you guys always have this video element to whatever I post. So, and I don't think my audio is quite up to snuff for me to turn this into an actual podcast. But yeah. So I just wanted to kind of give my current update, I guess, on how this no-buy year is going for me. And I've kept pretty well in other departments as well. Like, I also didn't buy, I don't think I bought any new clothes this year so far. I didn't buy any new clothing. I didn't buy any new shoes. I mean, it's only been 4 months, but it's really a far cry from my previous experiences in the past couple of years, especially with the pandemic. Like, I was really falling into this trap, I guess, or a cycle of buying something so that I can feel something. Which I think a lot of people can relate to. But I just think, since I've used all that money, now I gotta make things with that money. And it's been not as burdensome of an experience so far as I thought it would be. It's been not so much a challenge either. Sometimes I have thoughts, especially as we're heading into summer and summer knitting. I was thinking, oh, I don't really have that many summer yarns, so I would love to knit more of these summer patterns that I recommended to people, but I don't really have the yarn for that. So I briefly thought about buying some yarn, but at the end of the day, it's like, I still have some summer yarn. Like, you guys have seen in my podcast episodes that I cast it onto a sleeveless top, and I have a t-shirt, and then I have another t-shirt in mind, enough yarn quantity for that. And it's like, you have to stop yourself and think like, oh, that's actually a lot of yarn and a lot of things that I can make in a season. So it's, yeah, really slowing down the mind a little bit. And I think that's like one of the more valuable things that I can learn this year. So let's see. All right, we got some rosin. This is just plain stockinette, so it's going. And, you know, this chat is helping me keep it together. Okay, so now I actually have to go. Perfect timing, because my camera stops recording 30 minutes in, usually, and we're right at time. Perfect. Okay, so, well, thanks for coming to my TED Talk. And are you guys doing a no-buy? Or are you guys knitting from stash? Have you done this before? What are your experiences and what are your learnings? I would love to hear about, you know, what you think, if you agree with any of this. Or, you know, if you have a large stash and you keep it going, what makes you do that? And why do you enjoy doing that? I would love to hear about all of your experiences and your thoughts on this topic. Okay, see you guys later. Goodbye.